Rhys Owain, the Welsh legend of hospitality, who's somehow managed to be grounded for 24 hours to join us, the royal us. I suppose Yannick is here in the podcast studio. Rhys, you head up you head up food and beverage for Hilton Hotels in Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands. It's an absolute privilege to have you here because we're gonna pick your brain. We're gonna look at the crystal ball. We're gonna see what's in the future of hospitality. But it's just been such an absolute privilege working with you and your team over the years because it's very rare to find a company that is so massive and has so much global clout, but also so relevant and focused and local and innovative and always investing in training, which is, I think, the first sort of overlap that we found together as two companies doing a lot of education work. But yeah, I mean, when we met, you were running around Abuja.
Yeah, I was in Nigeria. I was, because you've been working with Hilton now 10 years.
About 10 years, yeah.
10 years, yeah.
So I had quite a contrasting experience going from your Seychelles properties to landing in Lagos and then getting put onto a Arik Air flight and landing in Abuja.
It's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure. But yeah, can you just give me a little bit of a sort of history of your journey in Hilton and to where it sort of takes you now?
Wow. And how I got from the foothills of North Wales all the way to
from the Shire
to a wine cellar in the Elgin Valley. So my hospitality life started in small country house hotels in the UK. I think I actually started working in hotels when I was around 12 or 13. Back in North Wales, doing your typical clearing tables and polishing glasses and stuff like that. And then headed off to uni to do criminology and law and absolutely despised it. And left halfway through the program and decided, hey, I've been working in hotels for so long, why not just continue the journey? And left Wales when I was about 19. Haven't lived there since. Moved into England, hit some small country house hotels, around Milton Keynes in that area. And then my first international company was Millennium. And I worked with them not far from Gatwick. And that kind of took me up to my F&B stage where I really specialized in food and beverage. And from there, 26 years old, I decided that the Middle East made sense. Which is funny because I landed in the UAE as an assistant F&B in Crown Plaza in Abu Dhabi city centre, and then kind of worked my way up within IHG, but really grew to dislike UAE in many ways. I find it a very, very surreal life in a bubble.
Yeah.
Everything's very plastic and
I think especially in those days, it was quite early days. Everything was being thrown up quite quickly.
And this was like back in 2010. This was where Abu Dhabi was still slowly kind of developing.
Yeah.
So I kind of stuck it out there up until we actually was part of the project of the first 6 or 7 hotels actually that were opened on Yas Island, ready for the Formula One.
Wow.
So I was the opening director of F&B for 2 of those properties. And then, and that's where I had my kind of love affair with the UAE came to an end, and I was like, I've had my fill. I want to see something else. And at the time, a friend of mine worked for Hilton, and I approached Hilton through my contact, through my friend, and got an interview and offered 2 positions. And one was Middle East still in Qatar, and the other was to move to Ethiopia. And in a way, it was a step down in position from a cluster director of F&B down to an F&B manager. But it was changing company. It was also changing country and changing continent all at the same time. And that was literally where my love affair with Africa started, but also my career with Hilton started. And for the last 12 years, I've been based in Africa, but working with Hilton also. So 12 years working, alongside my current vice president of operations here, Jan. He's been the VP of Africa and Indian Ocean for the entire period that I've been working within Africa. And I did 4 years in Ethiopia, or just under 4 years in Ethiopia as a food and beverage manager. Used the Hilton programs to work my way up to director of operations, where I moved to Abuja, where we met in Nigeria. And I'd heard about your company, obviously, when I was there in Ethiopia. But at the time, we
were wining
really...
and dining all your sort of...
GMs, exactly, and regional team. Exactly. So I'd heard about Under the Influence. I just didn't know who Under the Influence was. I heard about this handsome South African that travelled around the continent dishing wine out. And then I landed in Nigeria, and that was... So Ethiopia was a culture shock, going from, Abu Dhabi for 4.5 years as a developed country into Ethiopia. But I fell in love with the country, and I fell in love with the people.
So real. Yeah.
It's a beautiful culture. It's a beautiful country. Very real people. And then it was another stark shock moving from, Ethiopia, one of the only uncolonized countries in Africa, over to Nigeria. And it's a different mindset, different pace, different speed. And not only that, moving into a 672-bedroom hotel, which is an absolute monster. And a totally different style of property to what we're operating in Ethiopia. And I did 2.5 to 3 years there as director of operations, and then had the pleasure to take the role as joining the regional team in food and beverage, initially reporting into Jan, and then finally, as the structure kind of came about in Hilton, reporting into now the food and beverage team in Dubai, with our amazing VP of F&B, Emma Banks, who's leading the team, and brought so much more structure and vision and direction to what we do in food and beverage. But it's been a journey. It's been an amazing journey. And again, I'd say 7 years of that or 8 years of that has been knowing you and working side by side with Under the Influence, from my time in Nigeria through into my time here in the regional office.
Yeah, it's actually crazy to think how much has changed on the continent from a food and beverage perspective. I think, we're going to get into it in our chat around building purpose-driven offerings and like relevant offerings. But when we first got stuck into markets, like in Kenya and Nigeria, there was, like most early stage drinks markets, there's sort of a smaller selection of more kind of like supermarket type wines, which I sometimes say that, and I feel bad because it sounds like a bad thing to say, but I've drunk many, I still do. They're incredibly important part of the wine triangle. Yeah. But I know that as a food and beverage manager, director, it's so valuable to bring in sort of on-trade, hospitality-focused brands that are more, have a story to tell, and that's been sort of the most rewarding journey. But linked to that, you can't just drop, some of the wines that we work with and that you love into a market without giving that requisite sort of training and upskilling and building passion.
They're not all as commercial as what we see out there in the market.
Yeah, they don't just necessarily sell themselves. So, I mean, how do you translate in your role this incredible passion that you have into actually getting things going? Getting a list done, getting a menu done, getting things trained. It's such a I think sometimes we look at big successful hospitality groups like Hilton, and you marvel at how these things can happen, like from a conceptual perspective all the way down. Can you share any of your triumphs and tribulations and secret sources in terms of how you do that? Because you're extremely passionate personally about food and beverage. It's not just a title.
Yeah, I think
it's almost like a tattoo.
I think that's where it really starts, and I think that's something that I've seen. Actually, there's two parts to this. It's very interesting that you raised the discussion around wine specifically, or products that are on trade or off trade. And coming from the UK, that's what I was used to. I was very much used to, up until my 20s, of having wine that was very specific for shop shelf. And you kind of frowned upon having that on your wine lists in hotels. You operated a totally different list of products. And when I moved to the UAE, I was gobsmacked to find I arrived in kind of Abu Dhabi at a very early time, where I found then in Abu Dhabi, what I'm finding, or what I have found moving into Africa, is, like you said, there's limited selection of products that are very much shop shelf. And I don't want to list brands, but, you know, brands that in the UK you'd find in your Tesco's or you'd find in your supermarket were being driven in 4 or 5 star hotels in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which came across as very odd to me. But obviously through that 4 years or 4.5 years I worked there, I saw that transition in the UAE and a massive change come along. And this kind of phased out. And then when I moved into Africa, I was back again working with shop shelf wines in most of the markets. And, you know, when I look at South African wine, I arrived in the UAE, I thought I had this knowledge of South African wine, or I thought I had an international wine knowledge. And when I landed in SA for the first time and saw the magnitude of what you have to offer, I was totally blown away. I was like, oh, I'm a heathen when it comes to South African wine. I remember the early days of me being here, you having a go at me for drinking it was a Canon Cop 2015 Cab Sav, which I'd picked up 12 bottles of, and I think I was guzzling them down with a pizza. And I remember dropping you a message saying, hey man, look what I'm drinking here. Dude, that's the only 5-star platter Cab Sav of the year kind of thing. And I'm there going, oh, okay. So might shelf a few of those. But going back to your second question, or your second point around developing beverage programs, or any program really, doesn't matter if it's a beverage program, it's a menu, it needs to stem from having a passion for that. And something that I'm seeing now, specifically with people like Emma joining the company and bringing this new vigor into food and beverage, and Christian Gratnitzer that was there also, Nikki coming in now from marketing. We've got people that are extremely passionate about F&B, and Hilton used to be very much, you would work through certain roles to get to a GM. And we're trying to change that now, you know, and it's a difficult route to change because you've been doing this for 10 or 15 or 20 years. And we were known in the 70s as having some of the best F&B in the world. And we are now working back towards getting there.
That's cool.
And one of the first things to do to get there is change the perception of hotel F&B. And how do you do that? You make people passionate about food and beverage. You bring them back to the source of why do they want to do the role, and you make the role important. It's not just about being an F&B manager on the way to being a DO, on the way to being a GM. It's about a specialized role that's doing a specialized role within that property. So I think the passion is the first thing, and then it's difficult to give you a pearl of wisdom on how to develop a beverage strategy for any property in any country, because it changes so vastly from country to country. I think our approach across Africa, you know, or actually no, our approach probably across EMEA is, in any program we do, currently the focus is very much on locality. So that's one of the things that we really try to drive, is making sure that we are celebrating whatever is local wherever possible. So if we did a program here in South Africa, it would very much be focused on South African wine and not on importing French and Italian and Spanish and German or whatever. It would be making sure that we are celebrating those products locally first. So, for example, in Morocco, we are opening several properties. We're already operating 4 properties in the market, and we're opening another 2 very shortly. And in that market, we have got a big focus on driving Moroccan wine. Yes, French wine are prevalent in the market. Yes, a little bit of Europeans there. Very little South African, unfortunately. But one of our biggest focuses on our product list that we're putting into those hotels is, how do we make sure that we are echoing, or we're talking the voice of the local product first, and making sure everybody sees that there's a local product that is sensational. Then it's working with the right business partners. So it's developing relationships with companies like yourself. Obviously, we work very closely in Europe with certain companies. We work closely in UAE with certain companies, and it changes from. So currently, we're working on a wine program for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which is extremely challenging because every single country in Europe, Middle East, and Africa is different. So you can't approach that kind of program with, we want to do a blanket wine list
top down
that is forced upon hotels. It needs to be more from an inclusive toolkit scenario where you basically, you know, we set a standard of how we want the service to go, what kind of products we want on there, we create the storytelling side of it, you know, you create the culture of wine, the training tools around it, and then let the countries be able to build in the wines from their market into that program. You know, and that's, I think, is one of the things that Hilton does well as an organization, is a program that is customizable within different markets across EMEA. Because if you look at Africa alone, you're talking 33 countries. I think it's 33 from my last count. 33 countries with totally different cultures in every one of them. So what is relevant to operate in Nigeria is different to Ethiopia. Ethiopia has their own wine. Right, so, and there's also a different style of wine enjoyed in different countries across.
Guest profile.
Some of the cultures fall back to, colonization days. So some countries are more, driven by French products. So you have easier supply lines in from France. Some countries have easier supply lines from Italy. So it varies across the continent as to what those markets are used to, and then obviously which you can sell. So yeah, it's not sure if I actually answered the question.
No, you really did, and there's some really golden threads I want to dive into, because obviously relevance of offering is super important, and I think we're going to dive back into that. But the word that you use, passion, is just such a, for me, like if you look at a key indicator of a successful career in hospitality, it's that word, passion. And it literally starts off as, as a waiter or whatever, wherever you are. And, I look at some of the successful sommeliers in South Africa, some of them from Zim, some of them from South Africa, Kenya. South Africa was quite a sort of like a hotbed of learning and growth in the Somm world. And it just makes so much sense, where people with passion, they first of all, they're smart. They realize that if you're passionate about a subject, that typically will rub off on a guest. If you get excited, you come to a table and it's not like, would you like to see the drinks list? Here we go. I'll come back and take your order. Where there's actually like a relevant, passionate suggestion to a guest. That then has a positive outcome, typically where there's an interaction, there's maybe a purchase. I mean, that's always a good thing, right, from a food and beverage perspective. But then that has a positive knock-on effect, and suddenly you climbing the ladder in the world of hospitality, where your passion has kind of influenced the guest, and then it could influence a team that you lead, and then it can influence a hotel.
You took the words out of my mouth, because that's what I was going to say, was the passion. At the end of the day, that passion, it's great from a sales perspective and driving sales to a guest, but what you find across Africa, and after working with teams in Africa on the ground, that passion, it's those passionate team members that end up working up that ladder and prove that they are capable of taking on more responsibility and working in more diverse scenarios and situations. And, you take a great example that we've had recently is our HGI in Gaborone in Botswana. And you know Botswana quite well, and you know the GM that runs the hotel, Tabani. Just in the last 6 months, I think they're up to now 8 team members that have gone from Gabs to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, across the Middle East region, basically, which is where obviously it's easy to get visas and work permits and stuff like that for Africans. So in general, moving into that market is the logical way to develop and grow. And to see these young guys, like, team members that I know from the opening of the hotel, now sitting in a Waldorf in Ras Al Khaimah, it's just unbelievable, right? Less than 12 months ago, they were a barman in Gaborone in a HGI.
It's brilliant. And I think that's something that Hilton does so incredibly well. You've got all these acronyms and phrases for these accelerator programs. I can't keep up, but you identify talent and you foster it. But to be fostered, you need to give someone the spark. You need to show the spark. And I always encourage our learners that go through our training programs just to put that. You don't have to do it if you're not passionate about it, but if you are, show that passion and invest, and the rewards will come. So passion is a big one, and then relevance is certainly something that I think has become a lot more kind of prevalent in offerings. I mean, there's no point in having 24 imported beers when you've got a great
Yeah.
local craft beer.
Yeah.
Or, we work in the gin space a lot, and that gin revolution has kind of like swept through, the UK and Europe and obviously reached Cape Town in particular.
Yeah.
And now it's spread really rapidly into the continent. And in some respects, that's meant that some of our gin exports from South Africa have kind of suffered. But what's more relevant than having an Okavango gin in the Okavango that's made from the water of the Okavango Delta and sort of that the botanicals that are sourced locally? It kind of makes me happy, even though we might be losing out on a few sales of other export brands. It's relevant, and it's
but
fantastic.
you're also there. You know full well that you're touching a string close to my heart, which is the subject of gin.
Oh my gosh, yes, your collection.
I've been a collector of gin ever since arriving in South Africa. So I think I'm up to about 55 now, and that's all purely South African or Southern African gins. And so, in the last period, and it's great because teams then in my hotels are like, Rhys likes gin, so I've got a Zambian gin. Suddenly we've got a Botswanan gin that I'd never even heard of. And some of these are sensational,
incredible,
absolutely amazing products. Yeah, but you're right. The relevance of products in any scenario, from beverage to food, is integral to current trends in F&B. We need to be in the food and drink world now. We need to be relevant with what we put in front of guests, and the consumer is more and more educated by the day. And that goes for Africa as well as any other continent. And at times people look down at Africa and think, from a development perspective, but you also got to remember that there's a big diaspora traveling in and out of Africa into international countries, coming back with knowledge, with trends, and even setting up their own restaurants, which become competitors with ours. So that knowledge is coming back into the market, and you have people that are extremely knowledgeable. Social media is adding to that. So these the current modern guests that we're dealing with in our hotels, at times it's frightening the knowledge that they have. And we've got to keep up with that. We've got to make sure that what we're putting out on our menus excite them and is relevant to our location, current trends, what is cool now out in the social media world. That's all relevant to our everyday food and beverage.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes down to authenticity of that delivery, of that offering too. And that's something that we kind of inadvertently focused on as a business early on, because we got chased out of South Africa because we kind of weren't allowed to distribute wine. So we were kind of running around Botswana and Zim, and basically a training business that ended up selling wine because we were asked, can you help us with our wine list? Can you
This is beautiful, by the way.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's from the vineyard that you just looked out on earlier. This is the De Trafford Belfield Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's his Elgin Cabernet. So it's to create that authenticity. We often say to our customers, whether it's a lodge or individual hotel or restaurant, how you can reflect your values as a business through not just what you say, but what you do and what you share with guests and what you present. So a gin and tonic can be just a gin and tonic with a slice of lemon, or it can be a pioneering spirit like Musgrave that sort of speaks to the adventurous and pioneering spirit of a Jack's Camp in Botswana, and suddenly that becomes like a really relevant and exciting experience. I've just been really blown away by how over the last few years, especially you guys as Hilton, I'm allowed to say you guys, Hilton, Hilton Hotels, has created a purpose-driven offering. And can you talk us through that, Rhys, in terms of where that purpose-driven offering has come from and maybe sort of connected to your values as a business?
So, Alistair, to answer that question, I think the best thing is to kind of focus a little bit on ongoing trends within food and beverage, which we've kind of touched on already.
So to understand purpose, and you need to understand relevance as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So coming back to your point of relevance, so some of the trends that we're focusing on currently within food and beverage, and Hilton as an organization, under the helm of Emma from food and beverage, is very much focused on a certain vision that drives certain goals. And obviously part of that is making sure that we are trendy and relevant. Now, those trends that we would be focusing on currently, which is actually relevant for all of Europe, Middle East and Africa, would really be looking at, we've talked about local sourcing. So it's storytelling around locality.
Yeah.
So where are you in the world? Where are you in the region? And, if you look at, let's say, a country like Morocco, it goes down as far as having different products coming from different towns and different villages even.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, you're taking it down to a macro level where you can literally have olives in a restaurant from 3 different towns or 3 different parts of the country where they're famous for olives, but the lemons come from somewhere else and the oranges come from somewhere else.
But that must feed the passion of the staff too.
Exactly. And it makes them passionate about, people will always be more passionate about driving something that's from their locality rather than a sea bass that's been imported from wherever. So locality, local sourcing, storytelling around that is key. And that's a huge part for us. Now, just to echo something that Hilton's done recently in the UAE, is an initiative called Growth of the UAE, and that specifically is in partnership with an organization called Fresh on Table, and basically this is products grown or produced or sourced within the UAE. Now, go back to my days in the UAE.
Everything was
that never
flown
existed.
in. Yeah.
Exactly. So we as Hilton there, 17 hotels across the region, across the UAE, partnered with this organization, and they come up with a selection of our executive chefs, came up with a menu that rolled out across the region. And we were the first hotel to do that within that space. Amazing story, and an amazing tale to tell. But then that's also triggered us in thinking within our other countries and regions within Europe, Middle East and Africa, well, one second, what else can we do? Or what else are we doing already? And in Africa, funny enough, a lot of the products that we bring to a table within a hotel, unless they're specialized, most are grown locally. But we're just not sharing that story.
Yeah.
So the storytelling piece has become very important for us within Hilton, and especially within Africa. Second to that, I think, would be the experiential dining. So not just dining, experiences in general. We're talking now about, what do they call it? The revenge tourism. Now coming out of COVID, everybody wants to get back out there traveling the world.
Burning their masks.
Exactly. Burning the masks and using up all that money that's been sitting in a bank account. Now, that's brilliant, but it also means that these guests and consumers are looking for something that's different. They're looking for those unique experiences and things that they've not seen before. Life is too short, so let's focus on what is, getting those amazing experiences in. For us within F&B, that is something that we can contribute to on a massive level, because we can literally curate your experience from the moment you arrive in a property to the moment you leave, and we can make that lasting experience, that lasting impression on them. For us, that is key from any property, from a focus service hotel where you can just have, the most amazing breakfast in the morning with the best smile from a team member, all the way through to a Waldorf or an LXR where you sit down and have a curated 5, 6, 7 course meal. Doesn't matter where you are, it still can be an experience. Following on from that, another key one is, it again contradicts a little bit about this, so let's put this over there. The whole world of low and no.
Yeah.
And we literally recently rolled out the second phase now of a Cocktail Zero playbook for the region, in conjunction with a couple of different suppliers, where the whole focus of that is making sure that all our properties have something on the menus for all those health-conscious people out there, or people who do not want to be drinking alcohol.
Yeah. We're sitting in a studio and there's a gym next door, so we kind of
exactly
keep the balance.
They keep the balance. But it goes from, and we automatically think of people that, possibly teetotal or whatever. But it goes through so many different, focuses, from religion through to pregnancy, through to health-conscious people. And health becomes a big focus,
especially after the pandemic.
Especially after the pandemic. So the low and no sector is very important. The other one, and I'm looking at my notes here and trying to read them. Instagrammability, or the gram. The gram has taken over, right? And so making the world of food and drink Instagrammable.
Influences in the wild.
There you go. Influences in the wild, right? And you've seen it across Africa, and it's become huge.
Yeah.
There's influencers on every market now. I was stunned. You go to Addis, there's influencers. You go to Abuja, there's influencers. You go to Yaoundé, there's influencers. In every market we operate, we have influencers there. And the ability of highlighting, and what we try to say is, have one dish on each section of your menu that has some kind of wow factor to it.
Yeah.
Something that, as it walks past the table, the guests are like, oh, what is that? I want that, right? Now, it goes back to, the example that I always use in training, and fair enough, it's from Starbucks, but hey, it's the old, I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, they did the unicorn frappe, or the unicorn frappuccino, which was bright pink and blue. And that thing sold out, in weeks, because it went viral, just because of the visuality of it, right? So again, it's the whole, what is Instagrammable, what is cool, what is chic, what is different, what makes us stand out from the crowd. And social media has become a massive part of that. And then finally, which links into, one of the more key aspects of being relevant, is sustainability. And sustainability and the care of the environment, obviously in Africa, is a massive thing, but it's now a global trend, and food and beverage have to come along with it. So you're talking about everything from, plastic drinking straws, removing all of this from properties, all the way through to bottling of water, so no plastic bottles, and then obviously onto how can we make more and more difference. And that leads into, part of what we've done across the region with the feed into our sustainability goals. I don't know.
I think from a sustainability perspective, it's looking at it from a guest perspective, because I think we've all been a guest ourselves, where you're like, why are you giving me a plastic straw? Why am I getting a plastic bottle of water? But then the experiential side is, and that's kind of where we dug into this together, exploring the wines and kind of trying to figure out how we can do something better from a purpose-driven perspective. But how do you then create stories around a drinks offering that are relevant, that are linked to sustainability, and that are also shareable and interesting? And I think it's one of those things where I can't quite remember where this whole journey started around creating the conservation and wine list with Hilton, but it's just been the most inspiring kind of journey. And for a big company like Hilton to just think about that micro impact that you can have, like all the way down to a guest glass. So I think that's for me is the ultimate definition of like living your values as a company, where you can actually not just talk about it and have it hanging on a wall, but bring it into a guest glass, where you're saying, okay, instead of, not only are we not going to be pouring a supermarket wine, but we're going to be pouring a wine that's got a purpose in terms of conservation, in terms of sustainable farming, looking after soils for the next generation, looking after fynbos biomes nearby the vineyards. That's the project that we're working on at the moment. It's in quite an exciting phase, because we've got sort of these wines that are starting to head into different corners of the continent and be served by guest glass. Where was the origin of that that kernel of an idea for Hilton to start to deliver, just from a beverage perspective, more around sustainability.
So this is my opportunity, and as we discussed this in the car on the way up here this morning, early hours of this morning.
Yeah, very early.
This is my opportunity to plug Hilton a little bit, right? And it's not intentional, but it's to show that, well, it is a little bit, but it's to show that the journey really of where this beverage list transpired or came from. You need to go back to 2018 and the launch of Hilton's initiative Travel with Purpose, which effectively it's Hilton's environmental, social, and governance strategy. Right, so they put together an entire strategy on how to drive that throughout our properties across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And the mission was to cut environmental footprint in half and double investment in social impact by 2030. Right, so.
And that came from your CEO.
That came from CEO down. That came from the company globally. Right, now, when you go out and make a statement like that, then that creates obviously a trickle effect down through the organization, through the business, where property by property, that then needs to be taken up, and we need to tackle that on a property by property level. But in itself, that was amazing. And for us to go out in 2018 and make this statement, that in itself was amazing. But what then happened for Africa in October, which I think it hit home a bit more for me at the time, because in 2018, I was part of the regional office, and then suddenly, bang, we hear this new, following on from our Travel with Purpose, we now have a new initiative for Africa. And that was very soon after a visit of Chris Naseta, the CEO of the company, into Africa. And they came up with an initiative they called Big Five. And it was launched in October 2018. The whole drive behind it was to put $1 million to drive sustainable travel within the continent, with a key focus on 5 areas, which is youth opportunity, water stewardship, anti-human trafficking, local sourcing, and protecting wildlife. Now, the whole purpose of this, or the way this would be engineered, is that properties within the African continent could apply for a grant out of that $1 million to basically invest into the communities that they are operating in. So you'll then have a project going on in Nigeria. You'll have a project going on in Yaoundé, Cameroon. You'll have a project going on in Seychelles. And anything from developing youth opportunities for youth all the way through to how we can conserve, nature and wildlife. Now, stemming from that was the launch within our region under Jan. He created a specific work group to focus on that and see how we can drive this and make sure we're cashing in on that money and make sure that that money is going into the markets in Africa. And part of that working group in 2021, led by Klaus Steiner, our GM over in Hilton Addis, they had a team, and that team, one of the strategies or one of the ideas they came up with during a brainstorming session was, hey, we see these beverages that are floating in the market that, have something on the bottle written, $5 goes towards, or $1 goes towards the conservation of a specific animal. And I actually think it might have even been Tabani from Botswana that came, with that little gem, because I think she'd seen Painted Wolf, right? So that kind of came as a gem of an idea. And at the time, it was very much at that work group level. At some stage in that process, that was then communicated on to obviously myself in food and beverage, being regional director for Africa, and also onto Rajiv, our fellow colleague in procurement, who wears 2 hats for Hilton, and he does his procurement role, but he also is the Travel with Purpose champion for Africa. So he also keeps up to date with all that ESG stuff and ensuring that we are reporting on all our initiatives across the continent. Now, he came to me and said, right, how are we going to make this happen? And that's where we came and knocked on, Alistair, that's how we're going to make this happen. So we came and knocked on the door of Under the Influence and said, we need a handsome South African to travel around the continent and sell our wines. But no, the goal was really to see how we could bring sustainable, or wines with a sustainable story, or beverages with a sustainable story out of South Africa into the broader African market. And at the same time, we're focusing on local sourcing.
Yeah.
Right. So we're not, we're focusing on driving South African products out into the market. We're focusing on products that are doing something towards conservation, sustainability, developing communities that they work in, like Bosman, for example, development of youth, Mossy wines, where the young sommelier, we talked about him earlier. So, it's a young Zimbabwean sommelier, sorry. So it's all of these elements all together into one beverage list. And that's what it started. It started as, like you said, that kernel. And then it was a question, right, how are we going to make this happen and work? And it was along that journey, or along that way, that we kind of, during research, came across WWF's conservation list, where they actually partner with wineries and they award them conservation champions for doing certain things within their own environments. And so we were like, wow, we already partner with WWF a lot, with a lot of initiatives, and a lot of the big 5 initiatives we've done in Africa have had impact from WWF in different markets across Africa. So we were like, oh, let's tag on here. Let's jump in. Let's see what we can do with WWF. And that's what we eventually came up with, a shortened list of the wines that they're operating, along with a couple that we wanted to add in. And for example, Bosman, originally when we were looking at them, were not a conservation champion, and now they are, as part of the WWF list. So it's great to see that. We threw on some spirits to add in a little bit of flexibility, and to give it a little bit of to make sure that it's not just wine-led. Yeah. We put on some gins, which is trendy, local, relevant. And then we threw on a product which actually fits in with one of the beverage trends of the future, which is tequila. It's a local made agave, which is Leonista. Yeah. And it's a sensational product.
Incredible.
Beautiful branding.
Yeah.
Probably one of the best branded products in South Africa. And, to see those products, and for me to visit hotels now across the region and see these South African products sitting there on the shelf, sitting next to or even replacing international products, is amazing.
Yeah.
It's great to see that. But we are at an infant stage at the moment. This is a project that it's not meant to be something that's over in a year. It's not a promotion. This is, let's get products in that makes a difference, like you said, to the world in the future. And over the coming months and years, it's the more we sell, the more impact we have.
Yeah.
So now the next phase of this is the communication of it. It's getting it out there to the world. It's making people understand that we're doing this. It's having the products on ground with the team members trained on how to sell it, on the product, the stories behind the product, because some of those wines are sensational, and there's a cool story behind most of them.
Yeah, it's such an incredible legacy that's being built, because it is a legacy. It's a long-term sort of platform that's being built, which has all these positive externalities, going back to the brands, going back into the investments into conservation. I mean, earlier, just walking through the vineyards with David Trafford, where we were just having a conversation around like what fynbos can we interplant between, but that's conversations that's being had now by winemakers in South Africa. It's it's a very conservation driven approach, but the great thing is that whilst a lot of these projects and programs can be quite hard to implement, and sometimes the benefits can be not immediately obvious from a commercial perspective, right? So you put on like unknown or lesser known brands, but long term or longer term, the benefits are just, they start to like flywheel and accelerate, because the stories are richer. There's more sort of shareable moments. There's more authenticity. There's a suddenly a much more tangible connection to a brand in terms of their values. What Hilton's doing, and I just think it's fantastic, and I think it's a great lesson for any property, whether you're a small restaurant in Addis or a big internationally respected hotel group. You can create a purpose-driven approach to what you do, and have it make sense commercially, have it make sense for your value chain, have it make sense for your team, to invest in them and train them to share those stories, to have a greater impact in front of guests, to earn more tips. It's just a win-win-win. And
totally.
And it's going to be hard work to implement. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm extremely grateful that we're a small part of it. And yeah, our big job is to get these beautiful products into the different corners, which is, I think, largely my team's job with Rajiv. But then once they're there, to be able to really share those stories, and that's where the training comes
exactly
in.
That's the next step, because it stems back to that one word we spoke about earlier, which is the passion. And if you stick I've always said from day one, and it's I can't remember who told me the story. I think it was when I was sitting in Anthony Rupert. I think it was you that told me the story about the Blanc de Blanc from Anthony Rupert, the color of the label.
Sounds like something I might have said.
What I'm trying to touch on is that when something has a story behind it, when something has a provenance, and a story that a team member can relate to, or can think it's fun or different, it's always going to be a product that sticks in their heads, and they'll fall back on it. So for me, whenever you say that the Blanc de Blanc from Anthony Rupert, for example, that they actually got permission from Ferrari to color their label the Ferrari blue, because in his old car collection, he actually has a Ferrari with that color. So he's got a blue Ferrari sitting, a vintage blue Ferrari sitting in his collection. And so they actually asked permission and got permission to use that blue on the label of their bubbles. The moment you say that to a team member, and you mention Ferrari, in the country, especially countries like Nigeria, where brands mean something, that suddenly becomes a selling tool. That suddenly becomes something wow. And there's so many stories around this conservation list. And again, that's not the final name or title of it. We're still working on that. But
we've got it. We're just not revealing it.
Yeah, exactly. But, whenever there's that story behind it, be it Painted Wolf, beautiful story. And Lovo Gin, how much of it is true that it comes from the droppings of elephants? I don't know. But it's the botanicals that elephants, graze on, as far as I'm aware, right? But those stories help team members to sell, and help team members to have a passion to sell that product. But also when you share for African team members that by selling these wines and selling these gins or this tequila, whatever it is, you're actually protecting the wildlife of your own continent. That's something that rings true, and adds value to all.
It's a no-brainer. So I'd like to just wrap up by kind of saying, well done, and combining passion and purpose is I think a big part of how every single person not only can self-actualize and grow in their careers, but also make a difference from an individual property to a larger established group of properties. And it's really inspiring, and it's going to be super fun to work on it with you, Rhys, and your team.
Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for your contribution towards this program. It's been we wouldn't have been able to do it without you guys. That's very clear. And you've done well to get through this whole podcast without a single beard joke. So I think it's time to bring it to a close before the temptation takes over.
We could do that off air. Cheers. Thanks so much, Rhys.
Thank you.